All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of my unbiased viewpoint. That's exactly what it is. I am Sconyers. I am your host, progenitor, and CEO of my unbiased viewpoint. Let's talk about it. What do we do on my unbiased viewpoint? We go over things that are related to your economy. We talk about finances. We talk about politics. We talk about things that are going on in your community. And I just want to talk at this time because this is the moment that I take to get on just to talk about my unbiased viewpoint as it relates to things that are happening in our country, in our world, and in the community wherein you live. So today we're going to be talking about the Texas floods of 2025, and I do not think that it is over, ladies and gentlemen, because we are just entering into the season, right? So this is just a basic, comprehensive overview of the Texas floods, the timing, and just some things that I think that are very important as it relates to what's going on, and some possible solutions that we as a community can come together and talk about. And so at this point, I just want to just kind of like go over these things because right now what we see is that the timing of these floods started. Actually, the Texas floods had there's a season of flooding, and it starts in late May through early June. Right. So we are now in July. The season is still ongoing. And currently, the regions that have been affected are the Houston Metro Central Texas area, um, East Texas, and parts of the Gulf Coast. So those people that are like in the lower southern portions of Texas. Houston is in southern Texas. Central Texas is affected. East Texas and parts of the Gulf Coast. What we do know is that the rainfall totals in some of those areas was over 20 inches. And at the time of the flash flood, those 20 inches fell in over a 72-hour period. The rivers were impacted, and the rivers that were impacted were the Brazos, the Trinity, the San Jacinto, the Sabine, and also the Guadalupe. All of these rivers saw near record levels. So I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, it's an event that only happens every 100 years or so." We can't say it happens every 100 years or so. We don't know when these things are going to happen because any type of rainfall, any type of storm, every year these things can happen because we don't know what types of storms are going to bring the torrential rains or that will cause the flooding. We don't know anything of that. We do keep records, but we can't say it's an event that only happens every 100 years. No one should be comfortable with saying that this only happens every 100 years because what that does is it sets people up for failure. It sets people up for tragedy. It sets people up for death. And currently, the death toll, as of just a few moments ago, that I have been able to really account for based on all of the reporting that I've seen, is that there are 97 fatalities, right? So that includes drownings. That includes flood rescues that went wrong. That also includes the medical emergencies that were cut off from care. So there are a lot of things that are going on that we have to take into account. Now, I want to speak directly to some of the social impacts that we are seeing and the social impacts that are taking place. At this point, we're looking at mass displacement. So far, there are over 136,000 people that have been placed statewide due to flooding. There are overwhelming people coming into the shelters, so the shelters are overwhelmed. Some of the shelters have run short of cost. They have run short of supplies. They are running short on staff. And with all of that, including in that social impact, our mental health crisis. There's a mental health crisis that is going on, and that is something that needs to be addressed and it needs to be talked about because these things happen. There is a surge in trauma related cases, anxiety, depression, especially among children and elderly. Now, I do know that one of the parts of funding that was cut in the Doge cuts was there is a fund that helps children and elderly to deal with storm anxiety. And I understand and I know and I think that it is completely necessary because as a child growing up in Florida, every summer I lived under anxiety because I just dreaded the summer in Florida as a kid because I knew that it was hurricane season and I did not know when a hurricane was coming. And so my entire summer I was filled with anxiety and dread, could not sleep at night. My parents, my brother, my sister, they can tell you that I was scared all the time. So one during hurricane season growing up in Florida, in hurricane season, I suffered and dealt with anxiety. And one of the parts of funding that was cut under the Doge cuts was a fund that is set aside to deal with childhood anxiety for storms and elderly anxiety for storms. And I wish they would have had that when I was growing up, or even if my parents knew about it so that they could get me some help. Because every summer I lived in dread that a hurricane was coming and we were going to get flooded out and that tornadoes were coming and we were going to get torn up and twisted apart. And I kept that to myself and I lived up under that. So what we are seeing specifically regarding this whole thing that is going on in Texas right now, in that portion of Texas where the flooding took place, is that there is an inequity that has been exposed. And what do I mean by that? The inequity that has been exposed is in the lower income and minority communities, because those are the ones that have been hardest hit. Many of those people lived in flood prone areas, and that the reason that they lived in those flood prone areas is because it was due to cheaper housing costs. Now I know there are some people that live in those areas that can give me some history of how people even started to make a living in those areas, why it's cheaper, what was the demographic of those areas. It's just a tragic tragedy. And if we're looking at the economic impacts, currently it is estimated at over $62 billion. That's just right now. Right now, it is just estimated at $62 billion. You know that number is definitely going to go up. I would like for someone, if you do know, who can look onto Google right now or something and tell me what the GDP for the state of Texas is and what their emergency budget, if they have one, and if they're going to need FEMA help, because I know it has to have been declared by now a national disaster, and somebody can say to me yes or no. They're still waiting. Infrastructure has been lost. They've had loss of highways. They've had loss of bridges, water treatment plants, electrical substations have been flooded during this time. Right now, we're talking about tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed or uninhabitable. I want to show you like a time lapse of something regarding when the storm came in or I'm sorry, not the storm, but when the flood came in and after the flood released itself. If you can kind of just look at like this time lapse of before and after. So you see how the greenery is on the screen, and then you see what happens after the flood. This is a time lapse from a satellite image that was taken from a satellite in outer space, and it kind of like just shows you what the place looked like before and what the place looks like since after the storm. The flooding. I'm sorry, I keep saying storm because I'm thinking about the impending storms that due to the possible hurricanes that we might have this year. So back to what I was saying, mental health crisis is definitely, the people are seeing a surge, and you can understand in trauma related cases like that, that the anxiety and the depression has to be at an all-time high for those people who have been displaced and don't have anywhere to go because their homes are destroyed or pretty much uninhabitable at this time. So what we are also going to see there's a possible impact on oil and gas refineries in the Houston area because they have to be shut down for days. That's probably going to briefly spike gasoline prices nationwide. We don't know. We have to see. Normally, when a disaster like this happens in an area, It does cause, it has a ripple effect on supplies and imports and exports in certain places. We are definitely going to see in that area, there are a lot of crops. The crops are going to be affected in East Texas flooding. That's going to cost farmers tens of millions of dollars because just by that small video of the time lapse that we saw, we actually saw how the area was devastated. It's kind of like the tsunami that hit the islands some years ago, and we saw what the area looked like prior to the water drenching or deluging the area, and then when the flood waters receded. Everything was like it was a complete loss. It was a complete loss. Um, insurance, for those people who have insurance, the insurance companies are bracing for one of the largest single event payouts in Texas history. That means that premiums are definitely going to go up. And it is also possible that um, a lot, millions of hundreds of thousands of people may be dropped from their insurance. Like Florida, due to the storms that continue to come, a lot of insurers are leaving the state of Florida and leaving those of us who live in Florida without insurance or having to pay super huge premiums to keep our insurance. So insurance costs is going to go up. Insurance is going to fight these people because they don't want to pay out. And as a person who was previously employed by an insurance company and worked in the field of adjustment, I'm going to let you know right now, flooding, unless you have flooding insurance, unless you have flood protection or a flood rider, it is not covered. Any type of water that runs over the ground is considered flood water and it is not covered. If you have a water hose and your water hose is on in your yard, and that water runs over the ground, over the dirt, over the driveway, and gets into your house, I am telling you that insurance companies will not cover it because that water that runs over the ground, whether it's coming from your water hose or whether it's coming from rain, it is not covered unless you have an extra rider, a flood insurance rider, or if you have flood insurance. Your regular home insurance does not cover flooding. So brace for that. There are going to be some environmental impacts. There are possible toxic spills. Refineries, petrochemical plants released flood waters because the flooding, the petrochemical plants in those areas where the floods are happening or happen, that flood water has to be released, and it's mixed with chemicals, and it goes into rivers and it goes into bayous. So we look at those things, that happen. We have to look at the social impact, the financial impact, the environmental impact, because what happens is that even habitat loss, wetlands and coastal marshes get damaged. That washes away or erodes, so that increases future flood risk. We have water contamination possibilities. The E. coli levels are going to spike, and they have already spiked in Houston area waterways due to the flooding. So this isn't something that has not been happening. This is something that has been going on since late May. I'm sorry, I think it was actually March, if I believe. I think it started at the end of, let's see, those areas. Texas flooding started. Oh yeah, it is. It's late May through, it's late May up until the current up until now. So it has been going on for a while. Unfortunately, we have not been able to see a lot of this stuff on the news because they've been covering everything else. But people in Texas and certain parts of Texas have been affected. It's just because the state is so big, other people are not affected by what's going on in certain areas. We have to look at those things once we find out. Someone will maybe talk about it, maybe they won't, but a lot of the information we'll never find out about. Uh, we do know that there's going to be soil erosion. There's going to be large swaths of farmland that's going to be affected. It's already bare just based on the picture, the satellite scene that we saw. We saw how the satellite scene showed it. Like it showed the land just go from green to like desert, just based on the floodwaters, and that's floodwaters that's coming from salt water or ocean. That's coming from rivers. So we have to look at that and understand the costs that are going to be impacted, and what does that mean, so my question to anyone that is listening, anyone that is interested, is could there have been more warning? And the short answer is yes, but it's complex. So let's talk about those things. There is something that is called forecasting accuracy, right? The National Weather Service issued flash flood watches and warnings days in advance. I had one of my Facebook colleagues and friends, he actually said he was under the impression that flash flood warnings were issued days in advance, and they were. I have to let you know those things did happen. Flash flood warnings and flash flood watches. Now you see, you get a flash flood watch. That's, they're getting you prepared. But when you get a flash flood warning, that means that danger is imminent. They're letting you know that it is. It's like someone to say, we're having a tornado watch through this span. But when you get the word that there is a tornado warning, that means that a tornado has actually touched ground. So the people were issued flash flood watches and warnings days in advance. The rainfall forecasts were generally accurate. However, local officials delayed mandatory evacuations in some of the high risk neighborhoods because they feared evacuation fatigue from previous false alarms, which was another thing that was brought up. The people feared because of false alarms, or people like, well, it's been 100 years, we haven't had anything like this, or it happens all the time, and people get comfortable and thinking that there is no danger because a hurricane hit and it didn't do much damage, a tornado hit and it didn't do much damage. But that does people have to remain vigilant and diligent in protecting their property and protecting their safety, and protecting not only the safety of themselves but the safety of their families and their animals. And so that if you're living in an area like that, they give you the warnings because they want you to be aware, but they also don't want to wear the people out. I just say, let me know however many times I got to pick up and come back and pick up and come back and pick up and come back. This should be a lesson learned for so many people. I don't know how many people are going to pick up on it, right? There were communication gaps that existed for non-English speaking residents and the elderly, and that shouldn't even be, especially in Texas. That shouldn't even be. There should be plenty of people employed who speak different languages in Texas. There definitely should not have been an issue with that. There were also supposedly flood mapping gaps. There were many new flood prone zones that were not updated on FEMA maps, and that left homeowners unaware that they lived in a flood zone. There were infrastructure issues. There were underfunded levees, and there were drainage systems that failed in multiple places. So all of this was going on at the same time. And here you have the emergency management cuts that definitely impacted a lot, because there are some counties that had to reduce staffing for emergency management offices due to the budget constraints, not just from the what was going on with Doge, but even in recent years. So, could lives have been saved? That's another question. And my answer is almost certainly they could have, because faster evacuations in places like East Houston and Port Arthur, better bilingual communication, stronger enforcement of evacuation orders would likely have reduced the death toll. It definitely. And I would like to say, well, let me just ask this question, not just saying, but let me ask a question. Are these events tied to federal cuts, right? The context of my question is Doge cuts and we're talking about the Department of Government Efficiency. More likely, budget cuts under the Trump administration in his first administration, right? There are cuts to FEMA, there are cuts to NOAA, there are cuts to other emergency services, and it gives us a reality check. It has to give us a reality check. So let's back up. We have to back up in order to face a reality check. In the late 2010s and the early 2020s, significant budget proposals did target NOAA. They targeted NOAA's climate research programs. Those early budget cuts, budget proposals targeted FEMA's disaster preparedness grants. They targeted flood mapping programs. Not all cuts proposed were fully enacted, but Congress restored or partially funded some programs. However, staff attrition, delays in hiring at NOAA and FEMA left gaps in capacity, and that's not good. Flood mapping modernization lagged behind urban development in a lot of cities. And this is nationwide. Wherever there is flooding, flood zones, these are things that are happening. Also, there were some specialized forecasting programs like advanced rainfall modeling. Those types of systems saw slower development due to budget constraints. So while the federal agencies were operational during the Texas floods, the longer term erosion of capacity absolutely hampered the pace and the reach of preparedness. That's why I say this is my unbiased viewpoint. What does this mean for Florida and other states that are susceptible to hurricanes, tornadoes, and flooding? My concern about the Trump appointee who allegedly did not know that there was a hurricane season refers to real criticisms of certain political appointees to FEMA and DHS. We have to look at those things because these people who are appointed lack emergency management backgrounds, they lack medical backgrounds. And that's dangerous to all of us. Florida sits at the intersection of hurricane, flood, and climate change. Whether you believe that it is real or not, it is. And we have to understand in Florida that cuts to federal support mean that local and state emergency services must shoulder more responsibility. That means that it comes from your city, it comes from your county, right? Imagine this as a hurricane scenario in Florida. There's a fast growing storm like Hurricane Michael or Hurricane Ian. And I lived in Florida. I was living in Florida when we got hit with those 3 or 4 hurricanes back to back to back. So we're looking at a scenario of a fast growing storm like Hurricane Michael, and it rapidly intensifies, right? Then they start doing evacuation orders, or evacuation orders are delayed because of uncertainty in the forecast models or a fear of people overreacting. In those scenarios, you have underfunded local agencies who cannot reach all of the vulnerable populations. That would be non-English speakers, people who are disabled, and the flood maps are outdated and they're underestimating the number of homes at risk. You get a quick overflow of shelters. And that's a perfect storm where dozens or hundreds of people's lives could be lost unnecessarily. I want to kind of like drive home how extremely dangerous this is when you have a lack of knowledge and leadership. When we are appointing people without emergency management experience, this is going to lead to slower disaster declarations. This is going to lead to poor understanding of logistics. That means supply chains for fuel, supply chains for food, supply chains for medical supplies. There's going to be miscommunication with state and local agencies. There's going to be an erosion of public trust in the warnings. So it's not just a political problem, it can actually end up being life or death. So the broader threat to the future is this. What are we looking at? We're looking at climate change, fueling more intense storms, higher rainfall rates, and faster storm development. We're also looking at an urban sprawl that is putting more people in harm's way. What else is going on, Marcus? There's political volatility and underfunded federal agencies. Those are leaving gaps in our preparedness. There's a growing economic strain on the communities who are less able to bounce back after disasters. I remember after those storms hit, when we had those storms back to back to back, and there have been years had passed, and people still had tarps on their homes. We went down to South Florida, we went past the Okeechobee River area, or the Lake Okeechobee area, and that place was still in devastation. I'm talking about 3 years after the storms had left. 3 or 4 years had passed, and the areas were still devastated by the storms. It still looked like a war zone in those areas. Unless federal agencies regain full funding and staff, flood mapping, planning, modernize rapidly, political appointees have to be vetted for actual emergency management and competence. We can't have the leader or the secretary of NOAA or FEMA, and he doesn't even understand that there are seasons of storms, there are seasons of fires, there are seasons of flooding. That is totally somebody who has no idea what they're doing. No idea. And a person who is staunchly in opposition to helping people is going to miss the mark, and lives are going to be lost every time. More and more lives are going to be lost. The future is going to hold more events like the Texas floods and worse. I'm really concerned about what the summer is going to hold going into the fall for the state of Florida, for every city and state up and down the eastern seaboard for that matter. We have to. We have to. All right. So the the what we need to do is look at the fact that the bottom line is this: the Texas floods are a tragic example of disaster that's amplified by climate realities and systemic weakness. We have to have more warnings that need to be issued, but we also need to have an infrastructure. We also have to have communication, not failures, but communication that is accurate. We need to have evacuations, not delayed evacuations, because delayed evacuations cost people their lives. The past cuts, the staffing gaps, and the politicization of agencies like FEMA and NOAA have left the nation less prepared. Let's just look at it like it is. If you don't want to understand that, if you don't agree with it, there's nothing that I can say or do to make that point any more clear than it is. These cuts, these staffing gaps, and the politicization of these agencies like FEMA, NOAA, and other agencies, the health department, school, these are leaving our nation less prepared to deal with all kinds of things. And so for Florida, the risk in place is high, especially with an inexperienced leader. In the future, we are going to see more frequent, intense disasters, and without serious investment and expertise, the cost in lives and dollars is only going to rise. So we have to do something. What are we going to do? It's not about a political thing. It has to be about a people thing. It cannot be about, I hate the Democrats, I hate the Republicans, I hate the independents, vice versa, all that other stuff. What this tragedy should tell us that happened in Texas is that it did not have to happen like this, period. It did not have to happen like this. That amount of people did not have to die. That amount of people could have been evacuated safely, save for those who just weren't going to evacuate anyway. because the flash flood warnings did go out, the heavy rainfall warnings did go out. The people just did not get the intensity of what was going to happen, because just in a little while, it happened. It happened in a small. This is a video of a time lapse footage, shows how quick the Texas flood waters rose over. So the time lapse footage that you were looking at, that's provided by a witness. It showed that the flood waters were rising over a causeway in Kingsland, Texas, and completely submerged in the span of a few minutes. A few minutes. So that flooding occurred. That flooding occurred after the rainfall, the torrential rains that fell in the central Texas area on Friday, the 4th of July, the U.S. Independence Day holiday. And the death toll from the catastrophic floods reached at least 78 on Sunday. Now we know that there are even more as of today. There were 28 children at the time, as the search for the girls that were in that summer camp continued, and fears of more flooding prompted evacuations and volunteer responders. So there could have been so much more that was done had we reacted in a timely manner and got those people out of there. What are we going to do? In Florida, we have to prepare for the worst. We need these things in place. We need NOAA. We need FEMA. We need these types of things. We have a huge elderly population in Florida, a humongous elderly population, a humongous population of people who are not as mobile as others, who are shelters are probably in vulnerable places. We have a lot of vulnerable people in the state of Florida. We absolutely do. And so we need programs like this to help us. We need FEMA in place. We need NOAA to be able to do accurate weather forecasting. We need these things in place, because without those things in place, it's going to put us in danger, like we have seen what happened in Texas. And that's all. So this has been my unbiased point. See you all in some point. Rebuilding. So we want to